Hello and welcome to the e-learning module for anxiety. My name is Natalie Roberts and I'm a clinical psychologist in Hampshire CAMHS. So this e-learning module is suitable for any professional that comes into contact and works with children and young people. It's not intended as a full training in managing anxiety for young people. It's simply to give you some information and some practical tips and hints on how to help young people manage their anxiety when they experience it. We're going to be looking at understanding presentations of anxiety, learning how to support young people who are experiencing anxiety, and also how to get more support when needed. So first of all, I'd like you to just have a think about all the different types of anxiety that you've heard of and just write them down on a piece of paper. And perhaps pause the video while you do that. Just see how many different kinds of anxiety presentations you've heard of and you can come up with. So many of you will have come up with things like separation anxiety, specific phobias, PTSD, obsessive compulsive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder. You know, there are lots of different kinds of anxiety presentations, but the one thing that they all have in common is that they're all anxiety. So they have the same underlying process, and it's that process that we're going to be talking about in a bit more detail next. Our minds have evolved over many hundreds of thousands of years, and our mind's primary job is to look out for danger and keep us alive. Imagine that you were a tribal warrior crossing the savannah and you saw a shape in the grass and you thought that must be a rock. And in fact, it turned out to be a lion. You would be lunch for the lion and your careless genes wouldn't be passed on. But if instead you thought that's a lion, your body would go into a fight-flight response and you would fight or run away from that particular danger, meaning that you were more likely to survive, and your genes for keeping a watch out for threat would be passed on. So anxiety is a very normal mind-body state. We're all anxious. We have threat-focused thoughts, perceptions about the world, what's safe, what's not safe. So our mind works on a better safe than sorry principle, which is why it comes up constantly thinking about things that might be threatening, things that might be dangerous, things we need to stay away from. And it invents things about us, that we're not good enough, that we won't be clever enough, that we won't be funny enough, that we won't be the things that we want to be, or that people will judge us in some way. If you think about social anxiety, that's primarily focused on thoughts around what other people think of us, and that those thoughts are harmful and threatening in some way because they're negative. So you can see from this graph that the level of anxiety or low mood is worse the more we believe in the thoughts that our mind tells us. Now, almost every psychological problem, from anxiety, depression, eating disorder, etc., boil down to the same basic process. We ruminate about the past, we worry about the future, and we get stuck inside judgments and thoughts of ourselves and other people. We make decisions based on what we're worried about rather than what we care about. So we avoid, when we're feeling anxious, it makes us want to avoid things because we want to get rid of the feelings of anxiety. Now, because we needed thousands of years ago to be much more aware of danger around us, our minds and brains haven't changed since that time. So our mind is constantly busy still, warning us of things that might go horribly wrong, things that might happen, and how we might keep ourselves safe from it, because we're problem solvers. That's how humans have become such a successful species. But we also ruminate about the past, things that we can't change, experiences that we've had that have shaped us, and what we think of ourselves. When we take notice of a thought, The ones that grab our attention are usually the ones that are very emotive. So the things that tell us that we're stupid, we're a loser, we're not good enough, or that somebody else will think this of us. They're the ones that really grab our attention. And when we get caught up in it, it makes the sense of anxiety or the sense of low mood feel much worse, and it can stop us from doing the things in life that we really care about. What I'd like you to do is, in a moment, pause the video, set a timer for 1 minute, and just notice the activity of your mind. You might notice that it says things like, I'm not thinking about anything, which means that you're thinking about not thinking about anything. Or you might be planning your evening meal or your weekly shopping list or whatever it is. Just be a quiet observer of your mind for 1 minute. So take a look at what you noticed. What did your mind do? Was it profound, life-changing thoughts? Or did you notice that your mind was like a scanner, just jumping from one thing to another thing to another thing? This is what the mind does. It's never quiet, not even when you're asleep. So anxiety is a very normal thing. It's really important that we have it. When we're alert and slightly on edge and a bit anxious, then it helps us to get what we need and it helps us to solve problems. But when we become very caught up with what we're thinking and how our body is reacting, when we start to feel anxious in our body, it makes us really truly believe that the thing we're worrying about is real. And we might find ourselves very quickly being overcome by high anxiety, panic, and then we would avoid situations that we fear. It's very normal to worry about things like job security, education security, relationship security, financial security, and our health and physical safety. Essentially, in order to be at our best, we need to feel safe. A little more about the psychoeducation of anxiety is around motives and emotions. Motives evolved because they help animals to survive and leave genes behind. So emotions guide us towards our goals, and we can respond if we are succeeding or threatened. So there are 3 main types of emotional regulation that have evolved in humans over our evolutionary history. And those are those that focus on threat and self-protection, those that focus on doing and achieving, and those that focus on contentment and feeling safe. It's really important to be able to understand the neurobiological system that underlies anxiety, because then we know where we can intervene to treat anxiety effectively. In a species that doesn't have attachment, only 1 to 2% of offspring make it to adulthood. Threats come from things like ecologies, predators, injury, disease. At birth, babies need to be able to go it alone immediately and find themselves a safe place to be. In species that have a longer developmental period, and certainly humans may have the longest of those developmental periods, we don't now expect children to reach full adulthood and independence probably until their early 20s. Attachment is incredibly important. You need to be provided with a safe, secure base from which you can explore the world and everything that it has to offer, and be protected and nurtured. Love really matters. People with chronic problems often have had difficult life experiences when they were younger, which meant that they grew up or developed in a context of living in fear quite often. And this has a profound effect on people's emotional and cognitive development. If you have lived in a world of constant internal and external threat and have very few experiences of feeling safe or soothed, then it's much more difficult for you to be able to do this for yourself when you are grown up. So thinking about caring as looking after, seeking closeness rather than dispersion, as it is in species that have a very short developmental period. Individuals need to obtain protection, food and care when they're ill. The key is also to soothing and calming physiological regulation. In mammals, the developmental dependent period is long, and therefore few offspring are had, but there is a much higher survival rate of those offspring. Affection and kindness, cooperative and mutual support developed to support the prosperity of the group, rather than individual gain and exploitation. So you may be wondering what all this has to do with anxiety, but this is some information really about the neurobiological internal threat system that we all have. And going back to something that I was mentioning earlier, which is the 3 types of emotion regulation that have evolved in humans over our history. Those that focus on threat and self-protection, those that focus on drive, achievement and success, and those that focus on contentment and feeling safe. That's the soothing system. For anxiety, the 2 systems that are involved in that are the threat self-protection system and the soothing system. You cannot be in fear and feeling safe at the same time. So when you know that anxiety triggers or perceptions in the world mean that you imagine a threat, you see a threat, or you sense a threat in some way, your body will respond by automatically putting you into fight flight. It cuts off your thinking because thinking slows you down. It doesn't want you to think because it's less likely that you'll survive, because you'll slow yourself down. So you're automatically and very, very quickly put into fight flight. Now, if that threat isn't real, and very often in anxiety it isn't real, they're usually what if threats. What if something bad happens? What if this goes wrong? What if people laugh at me? What if other people judge me? Etc. Your fight-flight system is activated, but there's nothing to fight off or run away from. So you're left in this quite chronic state of your thoughts being very noisy and bothersome, and you might believe them very strongly, so it makes your anxiety feel worse. The antidote to the threat self-protection system is the soothing system. And there are ways that you can turn off the threat self-protection system and activate the soothing system that will help young people to manage their anxiety when it shows up. To actually see the threat self-protection system in action in pre-verbal humans, I've put 3 videos here which I think are very important so that you can see that this is an instinctive response to the threat self-protection system when it gets activated, and there's nothing you can do about it. When you detect a threat, then it goes on automatically. You can't stop it from being switched on, but you can learn how to switch it off. The first video is about a baby that detects a change in its safety in response to a noise. The second video is another baby that fears the thing that is happening, but at the same time, the mum manages to keep the baby engaged with her soothing voice, and that communicates that this situation is safe, but the baby is still very aware of the threat. And that's a very important thing, to be able to remain engaged and aware of potential threat. And it's the mum's behaviour that helps the baby to feel safe. And in the third video, you will see also a pre-verbal baby go through different stages of the fight-flight response, almost to the point of freeze, which is the final stage in the body's threat self-protection system where the body shuts down. And you very often see this in people that experience trauma that they can't run away from and they can't fight off. So the body shuts down and prepares almost for, you're flooded with pain, analgesia, so pain relief, and the body kind of gets ready and prepares for death. To view the videos, just enter the web address into your browser. The vagus nerve is the nerve that is involved in the complex threat self-protection system. The vagus nerve is called that because vagus in Latin means wandering. And this is a nerve that, as you can see from the diagram, wanders all over your body, from the muscles in your face and your head, down through your throat, to your heart, to most of your major organs, your digestive system. This is the nerve that's responsible for making you feel anxious, whether it's butterflies in your tummy or full-blown panic. This is the nerve that's involved in that. So it activates the body's threat reaction in response to external and, more often than not in anxiety, internal stimuli. And by that I mean the thoughts we have and the things that go through our mind. Just spend a bit of time looking at this chart, which shows the journey really from when anxiety gets activated through the green section, then the amber, and into the red if you can't run away from the threat or you can't fight the threat off, when you go into freeze mode and panic mode. And in the green section, you'll see that social engagement and openness to experience is actually very important. So when we're feeling safe and secure, we're much more able to learn, we're much more able to engage in the things around us. When we become under threat or not feeling safe, then we start to become more edgy, more nervous, more on alert, and we don't process so much of the information around us. And obviously, as we go through into severe anxiety or panic, we process even less information. So staying in the social engagement zone is safe and secure. You can be flexible and open and do all sorts of tasks and problem solving. And this is where we function best, but we also function with a little bit of stress quite well as well. So, you know, being able to achieve things, obtain things, success, achievements, those sorts of things come with a bit of stress. And our comfort zones, you can't stay in social engagement all the time because that would be a very, very small comfort zone. Moving out or expanding your comfort zone is actually very important. So we have to go out and make ourselves anxious so that we know and understand that we can cope with it. So it's really important that you expand and that young people expand their comfort zone and challenge themselves. And that will come with a bit of fear, a bit of threat self-protection activation. But it's really important that we encourage young people to move and beyond and expand their comfort zone so that their lives don't become too narrow. So let's have a look through the spectrum of anxiety, and let's start with, bog standard worry, something that we all have. Signs of worry will be being preoccupied with things, finding it difficult to sleep, depending on the level of worry that there is about that. We often see young people having these sort of disturbances around pressure times like exams and so on. A helpful response would be for you to be able to stay calm. We all have mirror neurons, which means that if somebody near us becomes anxious, we start to feel anxious too. It goes back to, again, our evolutionary history where we all need to be aware of any potential threat. So it spreads like a contagion. If you're with somebody that's feeling anxious, the best thing you can do is to stay calm, not get caught up in the anxiety so that they can see that actually it is safe, it is okay, and their anxiety will come down quicker. Offering comfort, being very compassionate, hearing what the young person is saying, just lending an ear, not judging, not trying to problem solve, but just validating what they're feeling and what they're experiencing. Soothing releases oxytocin, and that's the kind of love hormone, if you like. It's the hormone that helps us to feel safe and to know that we're okay. So if you can soothe the young person that you're with by being compassionate, being kind, in the face of them experiencing anxiety, they will begin to feel much better sooner. Unhelpful responses are things like calm down, don't worry, because they're not going to work. We all worry. So to say to somebody, don't worry, is quite invalidating if they feel that they have a genuine worry. Things that the young person finds comforting, encourage them to do. Also think about self-soothing. So there are lots of things that we can do that would help ourselves feel safe and secure. You can give yourself a hug. You can go and lay in the sun, go for a walk. All of those things that can be quite soothing and comforting. So find out from a young person, when do they feel at their safest? When do they feel most secure? What kind of activities do they do that makes them feel calm and relaxed? Listen to them in a non-judgmental way and use compassion. Encourage them to use self-compassion. One of the most important things to know is that we're not here actually to be happy. Although society tells us that we should be happy, and social media certainly tells us that we should be happy, life is full of variation, ups and downs, rough and smooth, and it all needs to be embraced. Our tendency is that we want to get rid of the things that we don't like and don't want to have, like anxiety or low mood or other things that bring us emotional pain, and only do the things that make us feel good. But unfortunately, that's not very realistic. So being able to understand that pain and suffering are part of being human, and to offer reassurance to ourselves that we'll get through it. So moving on from worry a bit further up the spectrum, let's think about anxiety. So as I said, it's a very normal state of mind and body to be anxious. Observable signs will be things like irritability, excessive worrying, really having very poor sleep, having very strong, unhelpful thoughts about the self, about the world, about other people, that take the person away from acting in ways that are helpful. So avoiding things, withdrawing from things, taking preventative action, for example, in obsessive compulsive disorder. So helpful responses will be something like acknowledging that the current situation is very difficult, again, being compassionate, helping that person to feel more soothed and calmer, and again, telling the person not to worry, or trying to minimize, or telling them something that minimizes the enormity of the situation for them, because that again feels invalidating. Often anxiety is the result of not being in control of a particular outcome, and that can be very, very stressful. Our responses will be helpful when we acknowledge the difficulty and can help the person to problem solve, but they're much more able to problem solve in a position of feeling safe and secure than when they're trying to take immediate action to avoid the feared situation or the feared event. So how do we acknowledge that the situation is hard? Well, we need to be completely present in the moment with the young person. We need to ask them to describe the problem if they can. What you need to do is keep nodding, show that you're interested, show that you're listening. And if you can, just paraphrase back what they've said to you. So you can say things like, I hear that, or it sounds like you X. So try and accurately reflect what's being said rather than jumping in with a solution. So how do we acknowledge that the situation is hard? Show understanding of the feeling. That's very important to help a person feel validated, and immediately that can offer somebody change in terms of their physiological reactions. They can start to feel soothed as soon as they feel validated. So you can say things like, I can see why you might be feeling like that. If you're thinking that X will happen, then it makes sense that you would feel anxious. I think most people would feel that way if they thought that. So what you're trying to do there is link what's going on in the mind to what's happening in the body and the feelings of anxiety. Also show understanding of the behaviour, saying things like, I can see or understand why you would stop doing X if you're worried that Y may happen. Once the person feels validated, listened to, and calmer, you can then move on to thinking about potential solutions. So be very clear on what the problem is. You can't solve a problem unless you've fully understood what exactly the problem is. And then generate solutions and, potentially have them all there to think about and try and help the young person choose a solution that is most in line with what they care about. So, for example, if they care about friendship, but they don't want to go to a party that they've been invited to because they're worried that they're not good enough, haven't got the right clothes, nobody wants them there, then you can ask them to think about what they really care about. And if they care about friendship and having experiences with friends, they can then choose whether or not to listen to their mind that is basically trying to stop them from doing anything that would risk them being rejected by other people, and choose to go to the party even though their mind is telling them not to. So very often, the things that our mind says is to protect us in some way. The mind isn't there to make us happy. It's only there to help us to survive. The mind doesn't care whether friendship is important. It only cares that you don't get judged by others. So if you can help someone to solve the problem that's causing them anxiety, it can be very helpful as a way of helping them manage the anxiety. Make a specific plan for the solution. So, for example, when the thoughts show up, I will notice them. I'll notice what's happening in my body. I'll breathe and try to help my body feel more safe and secure. Let's say, for example, that the situation is being worried about exams. And achieving well in forthcoming exams. So you might encourage them to develop a really good revision schedule that they can realistically stick to. And other things like perhaps asking teachers what they need to focus on, or any other thing that you can think of that might be helpful in that plan. The anxiety won't stop showing up if their results are important to them and if going through the exam process is going to be stressful for them. But at least when those thoughts do show up, the young person already knows that they have a plan of action. The important thing is getting them to stick to their plan of action and actually engage in behaviour that helps them succeed and reach the outcome that they want. Anxiety primarily leads to avoidance, which means that we make decisions about what we're going to do based on what we're scared of, such as not going to a party, rather than what we care about, for example, friendship. Anxiety robs us of experiences, but it makes us also feel relieved. So in the moment that you're getting to avoid something, you're relieved that you no longer have all those thoughts swimming around your head and the horrible anxiety feelings in your body. But later on, your mind does something different. It comes along and bullies you for not going to the party or not revising or not doing the thing that you had kind of committed to yourself that you would do. It is also important in the context of living a rich, full and meaningful life that engagement in all sorts of other well-being activities is encouraged to continue. That will be things like connecting with friends, with family, we're social creatures, so it's really important, for most of us at least, that we spend time with other people, having fun, just doing things together, connecting in some way. Self-care is exceptionally important, so things like sleeping well, having a good bedtime routine, it might be eating well, having a a good and varied and healthy diet, taking care of your personal care. It could just be, having a nap. So self-care is an important thing to remember and to keep in an action plan for a young person. Being active, we are not adapted for doing nothing, and being inactive makes us feel pretty low, actually. So making sure that there's something active during the day, every day, that they can do. Giving of time, giving of compliments, it doesn't have to cost anything, but contributing in some way is very important for people's well-being. These are all aspects of well-being that are evidence-based, that we know make people feel that their lives are more purposeful, meaningful. Being present, so getting out of your mind and actually into the moment that you're experiencing. So using all of your senses to really focus on what you're doing in the moment, what you're experiencing and what's happening. Learning. So it's really important for humans that we feel challenged in some way, that we're striving, that we're trying to learn new things all the time. So it might just be something simple like a YouTube art tutorial or a musical instrument, self-teaching, or things like going to school and learning and taking an active part in your education. So all of those things will contribute to a young person's well-being and ensure that when anxiety does show up, they just feel more resilient and more able to cope. So now we're going to move on to the kind of far end of the spectrum, which is panic. So this is an overwhelming, acute fear that impacts on a lot of people's functioning. So there's a lot of avoidance that happens when people fear that they're going to have a panic attack, or when they're actually experiencing a panic attack, that they shut down and they stop doing things. So signs of panic will be things like, you don't often see people flailing around, and sometimes panic can be a very internalized experience, but you might see them shaking, you might see that they're unable to think clearly or communicate well, they're not able to move, so they're literally kind of frozen, or they might be crying and in distress. Helpful responses, again, will be things like trying to soothe and help them to de-escalate, so deactivate their anxiety. Remember I said about the vagus nerve earlier on, the nerve that travels around the body. You can't stop it from being switched on, but you can definitely act to switch it off. And what you can do is just a very physical response. Just breathe slowly and deeply out. It doesn't really matter too much about the in-breath, but breathing out really, really slowly helps to the body to tell the vagus nerve that there is no danger, there is no threat, and we don't need to be active. It would be when somebody's in a sort of panicky state, then obviously keeping any communication to a minimum, but just letting that person know that you're there, that you're present, and you're there to be helpful. And then when the panic has subsided, you can then move in with some of the other things like compassion, self-compassion, other sort of soothing things. Although it says helpful interventions for panic, because anxiety is on a continuum, we all feel anxious at times, these are actually interventions that help at any point in the process of anxiety. So the most helpful thing to do is to turn off that vagus nerve, or at least to send a message to the vagus nerve that there's no need for it to be activated. So breathing slowly, breathing out slowly really, really helps. Encouraging the person to yawn. Now, even just saying the word yawn, I feel like I need to yawn, because it's a really visceral and a very tribal communication. Why do we yawn? Just have a think about why we yawn. We yawn when we're tired, but we also yawn as a communication to our group, our tribe, that it's time to rest and relax. So yawning tells the body, is a preparation for the body to rest. You can't rest if you're anxious. So by yawning, you tell the vagus nerve, look, you don't need to be stressy, you don't need to be switched on, we're tired, we're relaxed, we need to rest. So all of these things will help to deactivate the vagus nerve. And then obviously encouraging the person to move, to stretch, to squeeze their muscles, to do anything they can to sort of discharge some of those, the cortisol, the adrenaline, all those stress hormones and anxiety hormones that have built up in the big muscles. Otherwise it feels like they've got nowhere to go, and you end up feeling quite agitated. So wait for the panic to pass. There's not much you can do because you don't want to be communicating too much in that moment. Offer short, simple messages of comfort and compassion. Engage fully in the present moment through the use of the senses. So this is about encouraging the young person. Once that very acute phase has passed, you can ask them to name 5 things that they can see. See if they can name 4 things that they can hear. Name 3 things that they can touch. Name 2 things that they can smell. And then maybe just take in a nice, nourishing, deep, calm breath. And that's just a very short technique called coming to your senses. It means that you're not in your mind, you're actually very present in the world, and where there very often isn't an immediate threat. So then when you're calmer, work out, is this a what if worry? Is this something that your mind is telling you may happen, could happen? Or, what are the thoughts that cause the distress in the first place? And then if there is any problem to be solved, then wait until the person's in a bit of a calmer state and then go back to the problem solving technique that we talked about earlier. So the very first intervention that you need when you're working with a young person with anxiety is to help them to activate their own soothing system. And we've talked about ways that can be achieved through breathing, through self-compassion, soothing words to themselves. And then look at the ways that they might be avoiding things. What things are they not able to do in their life that they would like to be able to do if only anxiety wasn't a problem? When we're anxious, we tend to make ourselves a very, very small comfort zone, which we're very reluctant to move beyond. People become agoraphobic, and we've certainly seen a lot more of that recently because they fear being out in the world and the things that might happen to them when they're out in the world. So they stay indoors. But from staying indoors, they can't actually function very well in their lives. They can't do all the things that they'd like to be able to do. So get a list of things that they'd like to be able to do and then set SMART goals around some of those things. So pick the top 3 that they would like to change. This all comes down to behavior change in the end. We learn through experience. We don't learn just by being told, oh, that's not scary. You could go to the party and have a great time. You'll be fine. We learn by actually going to the party and discovering for ourselves what it was like. And sometimes it might be brilliant and sometimes it might not be so good. But at least we're learning for ourselves rather than depending on what our mind is actually telling us. So make specific goals, make them measurable, make them achievable, realistic and time limited, and then review those goals with a young person. How much progress out of 10 have they made towards achieving their goals? Sometimes young people need more help in addition to what their family or friends might be able to offer or what you're able to offer. This will be dependent upon their level of functioning. So for example, if a young person's not able to get into school, if they're not able to engage in normal tasks or activities of daily living because they're too anxious, then it's time really for them to seek more help. They can do that by speaking to their GP. There are youth counsellors available in most schools and in the community. Then there is also CAMS, which really see young people who have really deteriorated in their functioning. So what we have learned is that anxiety is completely normal. We all experience anxiety. We don't need to try and get rid of it. We can decide whether or not our anxious thoughts are helpful or if they're being unhelpful. Are they stopping us from what we want to do? Are they about something that hasn't even happened yet, which is what they usually are about? But it's normal. And in situations where people are under stress or have had a very difficult life event, it's very normal that anxiety is part of that recovery process. We recover then when the stress is over or the difficult life event has been processed. And if we're able to maintain self-care, connection and activity during these times, we generally fare better. A person can be said to have severe anxiety when they're no longer able to function in important areas of their lives. People who experience anxiety, which is all of us, recover by calming the threat self-protection system, which has been activated by an anxious thought or being in a situation of danger. Problem solving is helpful because it helps you to manage unhelpful thoughts by simply noticing them and asking, is this thought helpful to me? Let's take the example of somebody who's at school perhaps and they're stuck and they don't know how to continue with their work, but they're afraid that if they put their hand up and ask a question, that other people will laugh at them or think they're stupid. But on the other hand, learning is something that they really value and is important to them. So when they're in the situation of being stuck, they get the thought, I need to put my hand up, and then their mind tells them, don't do that because people will laugh at you, they'll think you're stupid. The young person can then notice their thought and ask themselves, is this thought helpful to me? Is it taking me closer towards my value of learning, or is it taking me further away? You're not going to get rid of anxiety as you move closer towards your values. It tends to get a bit stronger. And it's important that young people carry that anxiety with them, but at the same time discover that they can manage to still put their hand up even though they feel anxious. And they use their values to guide their behaviour rather than their fears. Re-establishing self-care is obviously very important if that's been forgotten about or no longer engaging in. Being connected with others, being active, giving, having purpose, gratitude for what people have, and showing care for other people. All of those things are, the kind of foundations really for good health and well-being. And if a person doesn't recover from anxiety or avoids the things that they really need to do, then it's probably time to seek help outside of that person's family and friendship unit. So on the Hampshire CAMHS website, you will find a Wellbeing in Action booklet, which is like a self-help leaflet, which talks you through all of the things that I've been discussing today. And your best port of call, really, if you're working with a young person or if you have contact with a young person that's anxious, is to go on the website, download the PDF and work through it with a young person. It covers everything about managing difficult thoughts and feelings, and living a life that's meaningful and rich and purposeful. All young people in Hampshire also have access to an app called Acute, which again is a really helpful tool for managing difficult thoughts and feelings. So simply download the app and register. There are also two really, really helpful books that I would recommend that you use in your work with young people. One is called Stuff That Sucks by Ben Sedley, and the other is called Your Life, Your Way by Louise Hayes. Both of these are really, really helpful self-help guides that you can work through with young people to help them manage difficult thoughts and feelings and live the life they want. I hope you found that module really helpful on anxiety. We'd love to hear your feedback on this session, so please use the QR code below. And if you'd like any more information or resources on anxiety, then please visit the Hampshire CAMHS website.